First up, the fatal shooting of Michael Brown by a Ferguson police officer this summer launched a national discussion about overzealous law enforcement and the militarization of local police departments. But now that we're learning more about the circumstances surrounding the shooting, some are questioning if the media needs to reconsider the basic storyline. Ferguson, Missouri is national news again. This time it's protests over leaks from the investigation into the fatal shooting of unarmed teenager Michael Brown.
Those leaks appear to support Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson, who claims he shot Brown in self-defense.
Last week, the New York Times reported details from Darren Wilson's grand jury testimony that Brown lunged at Wilson, and the officer was in fear for his life as he struggled over his gun with Brown.
Wilson says he tried to prevent Brown from grabbing the trigger and believes Brown had his hand on it, preventing even more shots from being fired.
Then the St. Louis Post-Dispatch got a hold of Michael Brown's autopsy report, showing that Brown had gunshot residue on his hand.
That's important because police have been arguing that Brown violently fought with Wilson inside the vehicle and went for the officer's gun.
The autopsy report also touches on other key details.
That report seems to support Wilson's account of one shot being fired at close range, the others being fired from the front, and that Brown's arms were not up in a position of surrender.
But don't expect the media to reconsider the basic narrative of an unjust shooting, says conservative pundit Bernie Goldberg.
Justice will only be defined by these liberals as A, an indictment of the police officer, B, a trial, and C, a conviction of the police officer.
Now, isn't that a rush to judgment? So is Bernie Goldberg right? Here to hash it out is author and journalist Roy Harris, Marjorie Egan of Crux and WGBH News, Callie Crossley, also of WGBH News, and Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University. I have to say, Bernie Goldberg has jumped the shark, years ago. But I don't know what happened to him. He was a decent journalist. He worked for 60 Minutes. I gotta say, I'm going to defend the media on this. The original reporting came largely from eyewitnesses. That's how it goes. I saw a range of witnesses interviewed, some more credible than others. It appeared that it looked to be an unjustified shooting of an unarmed teenager. Even though we were getting these police reports that, that there had been a struggle. I didn't know, for instance, until this latest report came out that there was blood found in the car. So there are other details coming out. And I feel like the media is incrementally reporting them very much like it did. What happened was that the rioting got out of control. That became the story, almost more so than what had actually happened to the teenager. That's where the focus was.
Well, I've been loaded for bear on this one because I really think that we're focusing on the wrong thing here. I don't think anybody ever really was sure whether the police shooting of Michael Brown might be justified or not. But there were some things that we're very sure about, and that hasn't changed. Michael Brown's body was left out in the street for hours and hours and hours, an incredibly disrespectful thing to do, and one of the things that prompted the protests. Then we had the initial, militarized response to the peaceful protesters. That got a lot of attention. Fortunately, the authorities in Ferguson did seem to finally get a handle on that, and things began to calm down. But I don't think that this ever completely hinged on whether the initial shooting was justified or not. I think you're talking about a range of other issues here, including, obviously, the way that the African-American community feels about the way they're treated in Ferguson in general, not just this one incident.
Exactly.
Well, I think it plays into a narrative, too. I think it's where the African-American community feels in many cities it's treated in general, period. I go back all the way to the O.J. Simpson trial, and I think it was clear to that jury that they had a corrupt police department that was going after, black while driving kind of thing. And I think in this situation, we had Trayvon Martin. You had the gentleman that was selling the cigarettes. That was his big crime, and he apparently had a heart attack when he was mistreated by...
the guy on Long Island.
Yes,
Eric
mistreated
Garner.
by police, and you have the stories that we talk about all the time. We've talked about this with you about getting pulled over because you're black while driving, or that there's this attitude of, and I'm with you on the reporting because I went back and looked, and there were a lot of stories back in August that did say we don't know what happened, but when it plays into this narrative, and you have the trust issue too that we talked about earlier today, of what is this family to think? Are they getting the straight skivvy here, or are they not getting the straight skivvy? So I don't think the reporting that I read was outrageous, but I think there's a big issue all across America with young black men being treated differently than young white men by the cops in too many places.
Well, I'm from St. Louis, and the Post-Dispatch was my first paper, so I was watching very carefully how they covered it and how the rest of the media picked it up. And it was, I think, Emily, astounding at the different versions that, that the witnesses had, which we're now seeing come up. And part of the problem, I think, was that the public, or the publics, kind of turned it into a cartoonish thing. This whole idea of hands up, don't shoot was the image that you had in a large portion of the black community. And then the people who were kind of unknowingly defending the police because they really didn't know the facts were saying, well, this criminal reached into the car. And now we're seeing, you know, that we really didn't have enough facts to go on at that point. What comes to mind, you know, you mentioned O.J. Simpson, what comes to mind for me in a way is the Rodney King situation where everybody knew what had led to those riots because you had that film that clearly showed this guy being abused by the police. And that's the thing that's missing here is you have these divergent stories. But, you know, I agree, Dan, the big stories have been what grew out of this.
Well, the thing is that all the facts have not come out. That's the problem. What we're getting is some very directed, timed leaks in support of Officer Darren Wilson. He may turn out to be justified in his shooting, but that is not what is happening here with these leaks. Now, of course, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the New York Times, if you get some information like this, you should be reporting it. And so what we have then is a confusion about what is the narrative, except that we know a few facts that have not changed. I don't care who says it, from what angle and what vantage point. Darren Wilson got out of his car and shot many, many shots. Unnecessarily, in my opinion, is the word I would use. Others have said a lot of shots at Michael Brown. So we know that as a fact. How does that play into now what we're hearing illegally leaked, that there was blood on the car and there was some other tussle and all of that? But no witness has disagreed with that fact. And so we're talking about a lot of shooting after the guy was walking away. There is some dispute about whether his hands were up or not, but there is no dispute about the number of shots there. And to me, that's the underlying reason that speaks of the tension in the community, aside from that young man's body being left uncovered for many, many hours.
Because Martin Richards' body was also left out overnight at the Boston Marathon bombing site. I don't know whether it was covered or not, but no one could see it, which was a big difference. You could see Michael Brown's body.
And to keep in mind, we have 3 autopsies. This is what we're dealing with here.
That's true. We haven't gotten all of those leaked out yet either.